The void of space was silent, but inside the stealth transport Predator, the air was thick with tension. Lieutenant Carter checked his wrist-mounted HUD for the 10th time in as many minutes. The mission had been simple: recon the edges of a suspected Galactic Empire staging ground, gather intelligence, and leave undetected. But experience had taught him that no op ever went exactly as planned. His team, 6 of the Navy SEALs' best, sat strapped into their harnesses, weapons secured, eyes scanning the dimly lit cabin. Sergeant Ortiz, their demolitions expert, absently ran his thumb over the grip of his sidearm. Petty Officer Singh, their scout, kept glancing at the ship's external feed. The others, Hale, Ramirez, and Dawson, were equally restless. These were men honed for war, and right now, their instincts were screaming. "Something's off," Singh muttered, his voice just loud enough for Carter to hear over the soft hum of the ship's engines. Carter agreed. The Empire's war machine didn't leave key facilities unguarded, yet their long-range scans had detected minimal activity on the station ahead. It felt wrong. He activated his comm link. "Pilot, anything new on scans?" Silence. A ripple of unease passed through him. He tried again. "Predator, respond." Nothing. Then the ship lurched violently. Warning lights flared red, and the cabin filled with the sharp hiss of decompressing air. A second impact rocked them, metal shrieking as unseen forces tore into their vessel. "Strap in," Carter bellowed, reaching for his harness release. The hull groaned. An eerie blue glow seeped through the seams of the cabin door. Singh swore. "EMP pulse. We're dead in the water." A third impact sent them spinning. The Predator was being reeled in like a helpless fish, caught in a tractor beam. The team braced for the inevitable. The final jolt came with bone-rattling force. Then, silence. The ship had stopped moving. Hale broke it. "Breach imminent." The cabin door exploded inward, and figures in obsidian armor surged in. Their movements were fluid, inhumanly precise. Empire shock troopers. The SEALs fought. They moved like ghosts, their training turning the cramped space into a battlefield. Carter drove his knee into the nearest trooper's chest, felt the armor buckle, twisted, and fired into another's visor. The air filled with the sharp bark of pulse rifles and the scent of ozone. But the enemy was too many. Their weapons adapted, firing arcs of electricity that shorted out their visors and sent painful shocks through their muscles. One by one, the SEALs dropped, spasming, struggling, until the darkness claimed them. Carter awoke to the cold sting of metal against his skin. His arms were bound, his feet shackled. A dim, pulsing light cast flickering shadows across the walls of a sterile cell. A quick glance confirmed that the others were there too, still unconscious but breathing. A door hissed open, and a figure stepped inside. Tall. Too tall. Nearly 8 feet, draped in a flowing black coat, its high collar framing a face of pale, metallic skin. A Galvath. The supreme commander of this sector, if Carter had to guess. The Galactic Empire's ruling class rarely bothered with prisoners unless they had a specific use for them. The alien's voice was smooth, laced with something resembling amusement. "Humans. So fragile, yet so resilient. Fascinating." Carter met his gaze, unwavering. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing." The Galvatha's lips curled. "A warrior's spirit. Good. It will make this more interesting." A deep hum filled the room. Carter felt it before he saw it, the sharp, ice-cold tendrils of something invading his mind. It clawed at his thoughts, prying, peeling, searching. He clenched his jaw, resisting the invasion with every ounce of his will. The others began to stir, groaning as they, too, felt the pressure. The Galvath studied them like one would an insect pinned beneath glass. "Your minds are strong, but you will break. They always do." Carter focused on his training, on the techniques drilled into every SEAL to resist interrogation. He pushed back, forcing his thoughts into static, into noise. He would not give this thing what it wanted. The pressure faded, and the Galvath chuckled. "Impressive." He turned to leave. "Rest while you can. The Empire has much to learn from you." The door sealed shut. Carter exhaled sharply, turning to the others. They were awake now, shaken but determined. Ortiz spat blood onto the floor. So, that was fun. Singh scowled. What the hell was that thing doing to our heads? Trying to crack us open, Carter said grimly. Didn't work. Dawson tugged at his restraints. We need to get out of here. Carter nodded. First, they needed information. Where they were, what kind of ship they were on, and how heavily it was guarded. His gaze flicked to the small surveillance node embedded in the ceiling. He let his head slump forward, feigning exhaustion. Rest, he muttered just loud enough for his team to hear. We'll need our strength. For now, they were prisoners. But not for long. Darkness cycled into dim, artificial light, marking the passage of time in their cell. No windows, no clocks, just the steady pulse of the ceiling panel shifting from cold blue to dull amber and back again. It was impossible to tell how long they had been there. Hours, days. The Empire had designed their prisons to strip away a prisoner's sense of control. It wasn't working. Carter sat with his back against the wall, his mind working through every possible escape scenario. His team mirrored his discipline. Nobody panicked, nobody spoke of things they couldn't change. Instead, they observed. Every detail mattered. The frequency of their guards' patrols, the delay between meals, the way the energy field shimmered at the cell doors' edges. They were in the belly of a beast, but it wasn't an impenetrable one. Ortiz exhaled slowly. There's a pattern. Carter nodded. He had seen it too. The guards, tall, armored creatures with digitigrade legs and elongated heads, passed their cell every 5 minutes. Not the most disciplined force. But the real weakness wasn't them. It was the ventilation panel near the ceiling. Small, but big enough. Singh followed his gaze. That our way out? Maybe. But we need to test their response times first. Carter turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Dawson. The signal was unspoken. A distraction. Dawson understood. On cue, he groaned and doubled over, his body shuddering. His act was flawless. He clutched his stomach, breathing hard, as if some unseen force was crushing him from the inside. The reaction was immediate. The guard outside stiffened, his helmeted head tilting slightly. Seconds later, the door slid open with a soft hiss. The guard stepped inside, pulse rifle at the ready. Carter watched every move, every hesitation. The creature stood over Dawson, prodding him with the barrel of its weapon. Dawson struck. It happened in a blink. His hand shot up, grabbing the rifle's barrel and yanking it sideways. The alien recoiled, but Carter was already moving. He launched from his crouch, his shoulder slamming into the creature's midsection, driving it back into the wall. Singh and Ramirez were on it in an instant, striking at joints, weak points, anything to disrupt its balance. But the Empire's soldiers were strong. The creature roared, its armored fist smashing into Singh's jaw, sending him sprawling. It twisted, trying to bring its rifle to bear, but Carter's grip was locked around its wrist. He drove a knee into its stomach, then snapped its arm in a brutal, practiced motion. The rifle clattered to the floor. Ortiz snatched it up and fired. A single, contained shot. The alien dropped. The room fell silent except for their breathing. Carter knelt, yanking a small device from the guard's belt. A key of some sort. He tapped it against the energy field at the doorway, and the shimmering wall flickered, then collapsed. "We're in business," Ortiz muttered. Not yet. They had made noise. The next step was getting clear before reinforcements arrived. Carter gestured to the vent. Ortiz, up. Ortiz climbed onto Singh's shoulders, prying at the panel with his fingers. It popped loose, revealing a narrow passage. Tight, but they could make it. Move. One by one, they slipped inside, pulling the vent cover back into place just as the distant thud of boots echoed down the corridor. From the shadows of the air duct, they watched more guards storm into the cell. One barked orders in a guttural tongue. The others fanned out, searching. But they weren't looking up. They moved carefully, muscles tense, the metal beneath them groaning softly as they crawled. The Empire's ships were vast, labyrinthine constructs, but the SEALs had trained for this. They navigated through maintenance tunnels and access shafts, using their stolen knowledge of enemy patrols to stay one step ahead. After nearly an hour, they reached their destination, the engineering deck. Through the slats of the vent, Carter saw a massive chamber pulsing with the lifeblood of the ship. Machinery hummed, control panels flickered, and towering conduits channeled raw energy through the vessel's veins. A skeleton crew manned the consoles, 3 engineers in dull gray uniforms, unaware of the storm about to break. Carter signaled his team. Hale moved first, dropping down silently, then Ramirez. Carter followed, landing in a crouch. Before the engineers could react, they were subdued, quietly, efficiently. Ortiz moved to the main console. His fingers flew across the controls. I can trigger a core fluctuation, nothing catastrophic, but enough to make them think we've got a reactor problem. That'll reroute security forces here and clear the upper decks for us. Do it, Carter said. Ortiz worked fast. Within moments, warning klaxons blared, red lights bathing the chamber in a sickly glow. Across the ship, doors would be sealing, alarms screaming emergency codes into every corridor. Panic would spread. And in that chaos, they would move. Carter turned to Singh. Where's the armory? Singh pulled a stolen data pad from his belt, flipping through schematics. 2 decks up, east quadrant. That was their next target. They had weapons now, but they needed better ones, something that could punch through Imperial armor. As the first distant shouts of responding soldiers echoed through the ship, Carter glanced at his team. They were battered, bruised, but alive. And they weren't done yet. The first explosion rattled the ship's corridors, sending a tremor through the deck beneath Carter's boots. Ortiz's sabotage had done its job. Alarms shrieked, crimson emergency lights casting frantic shadows along the walls. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks, security forces scrambling toward the reactor level, expecting a containment failure. They weren't looking for a handful of humans carving their way through the ship's heart. Carter pressed his back against the cold bulkhead, signaling his team forward with 2 sharp gestures. They moved as one, fluid and silent, their stolen pulse rifles tucked close. Every movement was calculated, every breath measured. They had made it this far by staying ahead of their captors, and now, with the element of surprise still in their hands, they were going to finish this. The armory lay just beyond the next junction. The doors were sealed tight, but Singh had already dropped to one knee, working the panel with deft fingers. Sparks flickered as he bypassed the lock, his muttered curses barely audible over the ship's wailing sirens. "Any time now," Ortiz murmured, his gaze locked on the hallway behind them. The temporary security diversion wouldn't last forever. The panel flashed green. "We're in." Carter was through the doorway first, rifle raised. The armory was vast, rows of sleek Imperial weapons gleaming under artificial light. Pulse rifles, plasma grenades, even a few experimental energy blades lined the racks. More than they had hoped for. No guards. The Empire hadn't expected an intrusion here. That was their mistake. "Load up," Carter ordered. The team moved quickly, slinging extra rifles over their shoulders, stuffing grenades into their belts. Singh grabbed a sleek sidearm, testing the weight before nodding in approval. Hale secured a bandolier of energy cells, his expression grim. Then the sound of boots. Fast, heavy, getting closer. They weren't alone anymore. Carter barely had time to issue the order before the first wave of guards stormed the entrance. The air ignited with streaks of blue plasma as pulse fire sizzled past, striking metal racks and sending shards of molten steel scattering across the floor. The SEALs reacted instantly. Ortiz dropped to one knee, leveling his rifle and squeezing the trigger. A single, controlled burst caught the lead soldier in the chest, his armor flaring bright before he crumpled. Singh took out the second with a precision shot to the throat, the impact sending the alien staggering backward. But more were coming. Carter ducked behind a weapons crate as another volley of fire tore through the room. These soldiers weren't the undisciplined patrols they had encountered before. These were elite enforcers, their movements tight and coordinated. Time to even the playing field. Carter grabbed a plasma grenade from his belt, thumbed the activator, and lobbed it toward the doorway. It detonated with a violent pulse, a shock wave rippling through the corridor. The walls scorched black, bodies flung back like ragdolls. "Move!" he barked, leading the charge. They surged forward, cutting down the remaining guards in controlled bursts. The hallway beyond was chaos, bodies strewn across the floor, smoke curling from the scorched walls. The ship's automated systems struggled to contain the damage, venting coolant into the corridors, filling the air with a dense, hissing fog. Through the haze, Carter spotted their next objective. The command deck lay at the top of a reinforced lift shaft. If they took the bridge, they controlled the ship. But the Empire wasn't about to let that happen without a fight. The Supreme Commander was waiting for them. As the SEALs reached the lift entrance, the ship trembled again, this time, not from their explosives. The overhead speakers crackled, and a voice, deep and unshaken, filled the corridor. "You are skilled," the Supreme Commander mused, his tone almost amused. "More than I anticipated. But your defiance ends here." The lift doors hissed open. A figure stood inside. The Galvath was a monster of a being, taller than any of his soldiers, clad in dark battle armor that shimmered with a strange, otherworldly sheen. His eyes, cold and predatory, locked onto Carter with something akin to curiosity. Carter barely had time to react before the alien moved. Faster than anything that size should have been capable of, the Supreme Commander lunged. His fist struck Carter's rifle, knocking it aside before slamming into his chest with bone-cracking force. Carter staggered back, the breath ripped from his lungs. The fight was brutal. The Galvath was stronger, but Carter was faster. He dodged the next blow by inches, countering with a strike of his own. His fist connected with the alien's jaw, a solid hit, but not enough. The Supreme Commander barely flinched. Ortiz fired from the side, his shots crackling against the alien's armor but failing to penetrate. The Galvath turned, his arms sweeping in a blur, catching Ortiz across the torso and sending him crashing into the bulkhead. Carter seized the opening. He surged forward, drawing his combat knife, and drove it into the gap between the alien's armor plates. The blade sank deep. The Supreme Commander snarled, a guttural, furious sound. He struck out, knocking Carter to the ground. The knife remained lodged in his side, glowing with heat. Hale didn't hesitate. He tossed a grenade directly at the alien's feet. The explosion sent them all reeling. The Galvath roared in pain as flames licked at his armor, the force of the blast finally staggering him. Carter pushed himself up, chest heaving. The Supreme Commander still stood, but he was weakened now. Blood, thick and dark, dripped from his wounds. The alien glared at them, then stepped backward into the lift. The doors sealed shut. He was retreating. Carter didn't waste a second. He turned to the controls, slamming a fist against the override panel. "We take the bridge. Now." The battle wasn't over. But they had just taken their first real step toward winning this war. The lift hummed as it ascended, the seconds stretching unbearably long. Carter steadied himself against the wall, pulse still hammering from the fight. The Supreme Commander had retreated, but not in defeat. He was regrouping, preparing for whatever came next. That meant they had to move fast. They had one shot at taking the ship before reinforcements arrived. Ortiz groaned, pressing a hand to his ribs. "Think that bastard cracked something." "You'll live," Singh muttered, reloading his rifle. "Just don't let him hit you again." The lift slowed, and the overhead lights flickered. A warning. Carter raised his rifle, signaling his team to prepare. The doors slid open. The bridge was a sprawling command center, sleek and cold, its surfaces reflecting the eerie glow of star charts and status displays. Officers in dark Imperial uniforms spun in alarm, their hands flying to controls, but hesitation cost them. The SEALs moved as one, silent, efficient. Pulse rifles spat energy across the chamber, dropping the nearest threats before alarms could be sounded. The remaining officers scrambled for weapons, but it was already over. Carter strode to the command console, shoving a lifeless officer aside. His eyes scanned the interface. Imperial systems were alien but not incomprehensible. He tapped the stolen datapad against the control port, letting Singh work his magic. Locking down external comms, Singh muttered, fingers dancing across the screen. They won't be calling for help anytime soon. Good, Carter said. Now find me the ship's command functions. The display shifted, revealing the core controls of the massive warship. Engines, weapon systems, shields, it was all there. This wasn't just a vessel, it was a mobile fortress, capable of wiping out entire fleets. And now, it was in their hands. Ortiz let out a low whistle. Hell of a prize. Carter wasn't celebrating yet. Where's the Supreme Commander? Singh pulled up internal scanners. A red marker pulsed in the lower decks. He's still on board. Looks like he's heading for the hangar. He's running, Ramirez said. Probably got a personal shuttle. Not an option. If that alien escaped, the entire Empire would know what had happened here. Retaliation would be swift, merciless. Carter clenched his jaw. We stop him. Singh hesitated. Carter, we have the ship. If we chase him, we risk losing it. Carter considered that. They had fought too hard to let the Galvath slip away, but Singh was right. The mission wasn't just about revenge, it was about survival. He exhaled sharply. Seal the hangar doors. If he can't leave, he'll come to us. Singh worked fast. Done. No way out. Now, it was a waiting game. The Supreme Commander was out of options. He would either come to reclaim his ship, or die trying. Minutes stretched. The bridge remained eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the ship's systems. Then, the main entrance hissed open. The Supreme Commander stepped inside, his armor scorched, his movements slow but deliberate. He carried no weapon. He didn't need one. You fight well, he admitted, his deep voice reverberating through the chamber. Your kind is unexpected. Carter lifted his rifle. Surrender. The Galvath laughed, a low, guttural sound. I think not. Then he moved. The SEALs fired in unison, but the Supreme Commander was faster than any of them had anticipated. He lunged, closing the distance in a blink, his hand lashing out like a steel whip. Carter barely dodged, rolling aside as the alien's fist crushed the console behind him. Sparks erupted, screens flickering. Hail fired at point-blank range. The shots hit home, but the Supreme Commander shrugged them off, his armor absorbing the energy. He grabbed Hale by the throat and hurled him across the room. Carter took his chance. He grabbed an energy blade from a fallen officer's belt and activated it. A vibrant, crackling arc of violet light extended from the hilt. The Supreme Commander turned, eyes narrowing. A warrior's death, then, he murmured. Carter didn't waste words. He struck. The blade met the alien's gauntlet with a burst of sparks. Carter pressed forward, driving him back, but the Galvath was relentless. They moved in a deadly dance, steel against energy, strength against speed. Every impact sent tremors through Carter's arms, but he didn't stop. Then Ortiz, battered but standing, raised his rifle and fired one last shot. A perfect, precise strike, right into the wound Carter had made earlier. The Supreme Commander staggered. Carter didn't hesitate. He drove the blade forward, sinking it deep into the alien's chest. The Galvath's breath hitched. He looked down at the blade, then at Carter. A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed his face. Then, slowly he collapsed. Silence. The battle was over. Carter exhaled, pulling the blade free. His team was alive, bruised but victorious. The ship belonged to them now. Singh stared at the fallen alien. What now? Carter turned to the controls, eyes scanning the vast Imperial fleet stationed in the system. They couldn't stay here. They needed an escape route. He activated the ship's engines. Now, we leave. The massive warship began to turn, its course set away from Imperial space. Behind them, alarms from the other vessels in the fleet flared to life, but they were too slow. The SEALs had come as prisoners. They left as conquerors.